forum where biosafety officers and directors and students and anyone working in the BSL3 lab will have a forum to exchange and as well gain some information on, on key topics, such as the one that we'll be discussing today. So I'll share my screen just to give you a brief overview of what cable is for those that do not know about this network. As I mentioned, the acronym is there for cable, and basically this is an initiative that was funded or started by COVARNET. COVARNET is a coronavirus rapid response network that was funded by CIHR a couple of years ago and successfully received funding for an additional year. And out of this network, which is a research network, stemmed a few major initiatives, such as the wastewater surveillance network, some modeling analysis to see the evolution of variants. There's a large projects on biobanking, high throughput serology and diagnostic. And one of the initiatives that we're interested in here today is cable. And basically about a year and a half ago, as soon as the COVARNET was funded, this is something that there was a priority to get going, and for the last couple of years we've been working at it. So basically the vision of this network is to enable Canadian scientists rapid access to BSL3 facilities and pandemic causing biological agents and be at the forefront of the fight against emerging infectious disease. So in other words, be able to react rapidly whenever there's a new pathogen of a threatening pathogen emerging. And in terms of its mission, basically, we want to try to facilitate the training of HQPs and increase the number of highly qualified personnel with BSL experience. We want to do, we're currently doing a resource mapping of existing knowledge, expertise, and infrastructures that are present in Canada and identify the gaps in some of these. We're in the process of generating standardized operating procedures for key assays that are useful for many people working in the labs, such as neutralization assays, growth of pathogens, etc. And we're currently building an inventory of all the various SARS-CoV-2 variants that will be distributed to members of the network. Want to facilitate the sharing of reagents, make it that speedy as it possible. And also, we want to coordinate the activities between the academia and the public health labs, whether these are provincial or federal, to facilitate the exchange between these two entities to accelerate research when it comes to Group 3 pathogen. In terms of governance, the cable is governed by an executive committee, which I'm chairing right now. And we also have Bintu Ahijo from UBC, Mariana Baz from Laval, Marcel Baer from McGill, Volker Gertz from Vito, and David Kelvin from Dalhousie. And also part as ex officio members are Marc-André Langlois, who is the executive director of the COVARNET, and Sarah Viebeck, who is the chief scientific officer of the Public Health Agency of Canada. And assisting us with the daily work involved for the cable activities are Rajesh Jacob, the scientific coordinator, and Nidhi Chaudhary, which is the administrative assistant. So the objective today is to, or at least for cable, is to organize once or twice a year workshops where BSOs, lab managers, directors, and users can learn and exchange with each other on topics that are relevant to BSL3 work. And for your information, the PowerPoint presentation that Lindsay will be giving and the recording will be made available on the cable website, which is going to be operational by next week. So you can find all if you need to revisit or share these information with other people, you can find it there. And for its first workshop, cable has chosen the topic of cybersecurity. And the presentation will be given by Lindsay MacDonald from the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity. Just as a brief bio, Lindsay has worked at the Communications Security Establishment for 17 years, including many years developing and delivering cybersecurity training to internal staff. She has spent the last 2.5 years leading a team within the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity that engages with Canadian critical infrastructure partners to disseminate information on the changing threat landscape and provide cybersecurity advice, guidance, and services. Lindsay works in different sectors, including health, academia, provinces, territories, transport, and the defense industry.
Potluck.
She's a graduate of Engineering from Queen's University. And her talk today is entitled Cybersecurity Issues and CL3 Labs. So I'll stop sharing and I'll allow Lindsay to share her screen and start our presentation. So thank you, Lindsay.
Thanks so much, Louis. Let me just see if I can get this screen up. Does that work? Do you see that?
Yes, just switch to the presentation mode. Yeah, perfect.
It's all good?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, great. Well, hello, everybody. As Louis mentioned, my name is Lindsay MacDonald. I'm one of the managers at the Cyber Center in our Critical Infrastructure Partnerships team. It's the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity, but as we like to call it, it's the Cyber Center. It's easier to say. I'm really thrilled to be here today and have been invited to speak with biosafety officers, operational managers, and directors for the CL3 labs. My team, as Louis mentioned, is responsible for providing cybersecurity advice, guidance, and services to a number of critical infrastructure sectors across the country, and health sector and the health research institutions are one of those critical infrastructure sectors. So my plan today for this webinar is to start with an overview of what the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity, or the Cyber Centre, is, our history, talk a little bit about some generic cybersecurity threats, and then go into some specific threats that I feel that the Cable 3 labs have sort of within their environment. And I'll end with a small discussion on some of the free cybersecurity supports that we have at the Cyber Center that you might be interested in engaging further with us. All of our services, because we are federal government, all of the advice, guidance, tools, it's all free. So that's really good news, I think, for everybody here. Just set the stage. Why are we here today? I'm not as familiar with Zoom as I am with MS Teams, so I'm not sure if there's a virtual way to raise your hand or to clap in Teams, but the question I just wanted to pose right off the bat is can I get a virtual wave or virtual hand clap if you remember the Life Labs cyber compromise from 2019? It's not too long ago. Oh, good. Okay, I can see hands raised. So I think almost every Canadian remembers the Life Labs attack, where they paid a ransom after the attackers exposed the information of over 15 million customers across some of the Canadian provinces. And Life Labs, as you might know, is one of Canada's largest providers of lab testing services. That's not the only sort of health lab related compromise. There was the Oxford University's, they call it the Struby lab. It was attacked earlier in the pandemic while researching COVID-19 cells. Hackers during this attack were able to access the systems used to prepare biological samples, and then they were selling that actual access to the Struby labs on the dark web to other threat actors. And then the third one here I just wanted to bring to our attention again is from Hammersmith Medicine's Research Center. This is a research center that's a British lab actually that plays a role in testing vaccines such as the one for Ebola. They were one of the labs that was actually on standby to test COVID-19 vaccines when they were hacked by a very well-known ransomware group. The threat actors were able to get data from the vaccine tests and trials over the past 20 years, and then they published that on the dark web, essentially selling that information for a whole heck of a lot of money. So obviously, none of us want this to happen to our Canadian labs. And so thank you again for joining me today for this really important conversation about cybersecurity in health sector labs. Before I go on and talk about the threats, as I mentioned, just a quick history of the Cyber Center. So we are a business line of the Communications Security Establishment, CSE, and CSE is a federal organization that is headquartered here in Ottawa. We work very closely with Government of Canada departments, critical infrastructure, Canadian businesses, and international partners, essentially to prepare for, to respond to mitigate and recover from cyber incidents. So the Cyber Center is Canada's federal authority on cybersecurity. So in the same way that you would go to Environment Canada for anything weather, or maybe Health Canada for the food guide, you can now come to the Cyber Center for anything cybersecurity. So what do we do? Well, we act as trusted experts in cybersecurity, and we help Canada stay safe by being a clear and trusted source of relevant cybersecurity information, by providing tailored cybersecurity advice and guidance to protect our critical infrastructure systems, by working side by side with our provincial, territorial, municipal, and Indigenous governments and private sector partners to solve Canada's most complex cybersecurity challenges, and by developing and sharing our specialized cyber defense, technology, and knowledge, or as we like to call it, the secret sauce. To give you a more concrete idea of what we do, consider this. On any given day, the Cyber Center takes between 3 and 5 billion actions to protect the federal government systems and networks from cyber attacks. And that's just the federal government. That has nothing to do with critical infrastructure as well. So in the same time that I sort of explained what we do, I think it's really important to highlight what we do not do. So first and foremost, we're not a regulator. That is not our job. We provide advice and guidance, but we do not provide any regulatory requirements to sectors. We're also not law enforcement. That's the job of the RCMP or local police jurisdictions, although we do work very closely with the RCMP on cybercrime. We are not law enforcement. And the third thing that we are not is we're not a newsroom. So we don't share the names of organizations or their incident details of entities that we are working with to mitigate any cyber incidents that do occur. So until 2019, the Cyber Center was actually, we were operating under the National Defense Act, which allowed us to only provide cybersecurity advice and guidance to federal government organizations. So it wasn't until the CSE Act was passed in Parliament in 2019 that gave us the ability to, for the first time, reach beyond protecting federal government systems and work with 16 critical infrastructure sectors across Canada. And you can see those 16 in this wheel. So at the top, starting at 12 o'clock, you see the federal government, which was our traditional focus. And as our mandate expanded in 2019, we have been tasked to protect the networks and the systems of these additional sectors. As you can imagine, each of these sectors faces unique cybersecurity challenges. Each have unique operational environments to take into account when providing cybersecurity protections. And research labs are certainly no exception to that. You're a very unique type of organization for us to learn about so that we can assist in the protections. So working closely with our partners in these sectors has helped us really understand the environments and the challenges that each of these sectors face. So let's move on then to some of the generic to describing the generic threat landscape as we see it. So cyber threat actors and the threats they exert on society are not static. They obviously evolve over time. And so consequently, the Cyber Center must consistently refresh our understanding of the techniques, the tactics, and the procedures that are kind of in vogue among threat actors at any given time. And you don't have to look too far to see how cyber threat actors are impacting critical infrastructure. One example of this was the compromise of the Newfoundland and Labrador Centre for Health Information. That is the Newfoundland and Labrador Provincial Health Authority. They were impacted by a cyber incident just over a year ago in October of 2021. And during the cyber incident, threat actors impacted critical IT systems supporting healthcare providers across the entire province. The healthcare system was essentially paralyzed, and healthcare providers could not access internal communications or diagnostics information. They were forced to adopt a paper-based approach to appointments and emergency procedures. And as a result, thousands of medical appointments were delayed. And in addition to service disruptions, there was sensitive information pertaining to hundreds of thousands of Canadian staff and patients that was stolen by the threat actor. And the recovery from this incident is still ongoing to this day. So they're past the year mark and they are still rebuilding their networks. This incident is just one of many that really does highlight why it's so crucial for the Cyber Center to provide support to our critical infrastructure and help build deep partnerships with all of you so that we can help improve the digital resilience within Canada. So if we look at the current threat landscape, every second year, we publish what we call the National Cyber Threat Assessment. And the latest one just came out 4 or 5 weeks ago. So it's very new. It's a very interesting read. So I do encourage you all to have a look. It's written in a way that we can all understand the threats. I'll go through them though quickly today. Because of our aperture of classified, sensitive, and open source data, it tells us a few really interesting things that are reflected as the key judgments in this threat assessment. So the next few slides that I go over will cover the cyber threat narratives that we judge are the most dynamic and impactful, and that will continue to drive cyber threat activity into 2024. These are all the challenges that we should all be talking about and working towards mitigating. They relate to ransomware being a persistent threat to Canadian organizations, to critical infrastructure being increasingly at risk for cyber threat activity, to state-sponsored threat activity that is impacting Canadians, to online foreign influence campaigns that are creating distrust for many Canadians, and the last one being disruptive technologies that are not only bringing new opportunities, but they also come with new vulnerabilities and therefore new threats. So the first one, ransomware is a persistent threat to Canadian organizations. Ransomware, due to its impact on an organization's ability to function, ransomware is the most disruptive form of cybercrime facing Canadians and Canadian organizations today. Cyber criminals deploying ransomware have evolved in a growing and sophisticated cybercrime ecosystem and will continue to adapt to maximize their profits. It's a big business these days. Now with cyber threat actors selling their services and their tools online, so ransomware as a service is a thing now. You no longer need the technical expertise to become a cyber threat actor. It's really a full service business, unfortunately. And critical infrastructure are the most lucrative ransomware targets because you are the least able to endure operating disruptions. The impacts of ransomware go beyond the financial cost of paying the ransom itself. We're talking about the cost of downtime, which for you might be the loss of pathogens if their storage locations are impacted, if freezers are impacted, refrigerators are turned off, those kinds of things. It's the cost to rebuild the network. It's the cost to having lost your data. And then all the hidden costs associated with, reputational damage if you do get disrupted by cyber threat actors. So none of your organizations and your labs are immune to cybercrime. Things like the lack of proper network perimeter devices, or the lack of adequate and timely patching of software, or which I suspect is quite true maybe in your environments, is the use of outdated or unsupported legacy devices. There's a whole slew of supply chain compromises as well. And then there's the ability now for threat actors to use vulnerabilities in connected operational technology devices that all make your labs very lucrative targets. If you look at the statistics on the bottom here, you see that in the first half of 2021, the global ransomware attacks increased by 151% when compared to the first half of 2020. This increase is likely due, from what I mentioned earlier, is the growth of ransomware as a service. It's a business model now. The other statistic here is the global average cost of recovery from a ransomware incident. So it's the cost of paying the ransom, but also rebuilding the compromised network. It has more than doubled in the last year. So it went from under $1 million. It went from just under $1 million in 2020 to just over $2 million in 2021. The second one, again, critical infrastructure is increasingly at risk from cyber threat activity. So two most prevalent types of cyber threat actors targeting critical infrastructure are the cyber criminals and the state-sponsored threat actors. And here's one of the differences. So cyber criminals are motivated by money, and they exploit critical infrastructure because downtime can be harmful to your industrial processes and the customers and clients that you serve. State-sponsored threat actors, they target critical infrastructure to collect information through espionage, to pre-position themselves in case of future hostilities, and really as a form of power projection and intimidation. So then we also have this new sort of vulnerability, which is through operational technology. Operational technology is now increasing the exposure of critical infrastructure's IT networks to the internet, and therefore increasing the threat surface. So this means it's increasing the potential ways that a threat actor can exploit your network. And I can confidently say that threats involving operational technology are becoming of increasing concern. It's kind of like a double-edged sword. The integration of information technology into these operational technology devices have many management, performance, and productivity benefits, but it comes at a cost of exposing your organization to cyber threats. So, for example, manufacturers of operational technology are now building in internet-facing components to facilitate over-the-air updates, to enable delivery of managed services for those technologies without having to go on site. You may have some of this operational technology in your labs, things like, as I mentioned earlier, freezers, maybe some of the imaging equipment, and other devices may have IT equipment integrated into their systems. So devices that were previously not accessible at all through the internet, given their air gap traditionally that were in place, can now be actively exploited, which means there are these new vectors that threat actors can exploit. And then there's the other side of the coin, which is just as scary, and that is that threat actors can still access vulnerabilities through your networks, but now they can propagate through the networks and get to your operational technology and actually compromise the operational technology. And an example of that, which you may be familiar with, was the Colonial Pipeline compromise in the US in May of 2021. This caused massive disruption in fuel supply along the entire eastern United States. And in that example, the threat actor accessed the organization's IT infrastructure, but then they were able to navigate through the network to threaten the adjacent operational technology. Not good. So it is increasingly likely that threat actors will attempt to access and map and exploit operational technology. So please be aware of that. The third threat here is state-sponsored threat activity is impacting Canadians. So state-sponsored programs of China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea, they pose the greatest strategic threat to Canadian organizations. These threat actors are actively probing government systems and critical infrastructure for their own strategic intent. They're targeting entities like research organizations, such as yours, who have valuable information that they can use for their strategic purposes. They want proprietary information on vaccines. They want your manufacturing processes. They want your research findings. In the past 2 years, we've observed many state-sponsored threat actors exploiting commonly used software platforms to then target thousands and sometimes hundreds of thousands of victims across the globe. And here's one example, as you see in the graph or the picture on the right. So in March of 2021, Chinese state-sponsored cyber threat actors, they compromised Microsoft Exchange servers worldwide in what was very likely an effort to steal intellectual property and acquire personal information. So globally, there's an estimated 400,000 servers that were affected. And while it's really difficult to know how many of them were Canadian, we assessed that there was upwards of 9,000 Canadian servers that were vulnerable to that compromise. And the second one down below relates to the SolarWinds compromise. I won't go into the details there, but essentially with those two compromises, it really has forced third parties to conduct costly mitigations and costly mitigation activities, and for all of us to look at supply chain really differently. So we could go on and talk about supply chain compromises in detail, but I will not right now. Number 4, cyber threat actors are attempting to influence Canadians and basically degrading trust in online spaces. So cyber threat actors are using, more so over the last 2 years than ever before, what we call misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation. The definitions are at the bottom there. It's really evolved over the last 2 years because machine learning has enabled technologies to make fake content easier and easier to manufacture and harder to detect. And just a quick example of this kind of dis, and malinformation that sort of hits close to home. In April of this year, the Cyber Center reported that Russia was spreading dis, and malinformation about Canadian forces members committing war crimes in the Ukraine and using fake images to back up these false narratives about Canada's involvement in the conflict. So things like that can have major implications to trust of organizations. The last one here, disruptive technologies. So the rapid development of technology creates many opportunities, and some of these developments can be said to be disruptive because they fundamentally alter how we do things by providing significant improvements over the existing technologies. But just as advanced technologies can be used to support commercial objectives, they also have that malicious side to them where sophisticated threat actors can compromise these new technologies. And we're warning about 3 of these kind of disruptive technologies going forward in the next 2 years. The first is about digital technologies or digital assets. This is like cryptocurrencies. Machine learning is another one. and the risks and threats associated with quantum computing. Again, I encourage you to have a look at the National Cyber Threat Assessment if you want to learn a little bit more about these three specific disruptive technologies. But for now, I wanted to sort of move from that sort of generic set of threats to talking a little bit more about the specific threats to your research organizations and your labs. So it is very clear that research and development organizations are high value targets for cyber threat actors. They have often and continue to carry out disruptive cyber threat activities. We've seen them modifying research data. We've seen them deleting research data. For yourselves, you might be concerned about them accessing your pathogen inventory data, maybe deploying ransomware on your system so that you cannot access your networks or any of the devices connected to your networks. You should be concerned with them stealing and selling data on the dark web. And this kind of data that they're interested in is employee information, passwords, patient information. All of this PII sells for a lot of money on the dark web. And they're also accessing your networks so that they can gain sort of more strategic advantages and provide information to your competitors, perhaps. And to do that, they want test results. They might want bioinformatic database accesses. Maybe they're interested in your manufacturing process. The list goes on and on and on. So let me just see what my next slide is. Yeah, okay. So, sorry. I wanted to talk a little bit about phishing and insider threat, because they are the most probable ways that cyber threat actors can get into your networks. So phishing, this is when a cyber threat actor calls or texts or emails or uses any kind of social media to trick you into clicking on a malicious link or downloading malware or sharing some sensitive information. Phishing attacks may allow the threat actor to steal your passwords, and that can be used then to log into your research portals or any of your work-related accounts. And the link on the slide, or the bullet that says phishing, it is a link to one of our publications that I really suggest you have a look at. It's a really good one-pager that's called "Don't Take the Bait: Recognize and Avoid Phishing Attacks." The other one here on the slide relates to insider threat. So anyone that has access to your infrastructure and data can intentionally or unintentionally cause harm. As an example of an intentional insider threat, a member of your team or organization might gain access to research databases and steal the data and sell it off to your competitors. Whereas an example of unintended insider threat is a researcher or colleague might lose one of their USB keys or one of their other devices. And whether the insider threat is intentional or unintentional, the effects can really impede progress or put some of your information at risk. And so that bullet on this slide also, it has a link to one of our publications that I really suggest that you have a look at, and it's called "How to Protect Your Organization from Insider Threats." The other one that I put here at the bottom is Public Safety, also has a toolkit and a checklist related to resilience for insider risk. So I do encourage you to have a look at both of those. So preventing phishing and insider threat. So how do you prevent it? Well, there are a number of ways, obviously, that your IT security teams or the academic institutions whose network that you utilize can put in place to ensure that they have improved cyber controls to prevent against phishing or insider threat. But I wanted to give you a couple things that all of you can walk away with. One is to implement policies and procedures to monitor employees handling sensitive information. I suspect that you're going to be looking at what policies need to be put in place for your staff in these labs. And this is one thing that I think you should consider is having, working with maybe your IT security teams on establishing a cybersecurity policy for specific to your lab environments. These policies could provide guidance on how to monitor employees that are handling sensitive information. It could include things like doing security screening of employees that are handling sensitive data. And it also should absolutely include the second bullet there in green, what mandatory training and awareness sessions your employees should be taking related to cybersecurity, specifically to probably phishing, malware, ransomware, and some of the other risks we talked about today. The other items on this slide, these all relate to preventing phishing or insider threat, but they are more of the items and elements that I suggest your IT security teams should be responsible for. I did want to put them on the list though, because if you do have an opportunity to connect and contact with your IT security teams who manage your networks and the security of your networks, these are the questions you should ask of them. Ask them how they are doing MFA. Ask them if they have offline backups. Ask them if they're doing automated patching, if they have an incident response plan, and so on and so forth. So that brings me sort of to the end of my presentation. The threats are real. They are out there, and threat actors are definitely looking at your systems and your networks. You have a lot of information there that they would like to either gain for strategic purposes or gain so that they can sell on the dark web for money. So I want to leave you with one slide on how the Cyber Center can support the Cable 3 labs. So we have 5 main service lines, as you see on the slide here, and everything that we offer within these service lines is entirely free. So we do incident handling support. So if there has been an incident, we can help with the forensics, the mitigation, the containment. We do threat intelligence, and we provide that out to organizations that are interested in knowing what the new vulnerabilities are, who the new threat actors are. That comes with a lot of mitigation advice as well. We have a number of community building opportunities. We do have a threat brief that we give every 2 weeks to IT security professionals. So if your organization's IT security teams aren't already working with us, maybe they want to come to these threat briefings where they learn about the new vulnerabilities that are that we're keeping an eye on and the new threat actors that we're keeping an eye on at the Cyber Center. We offer a lot of other training opportunities as well through community building. We have advice and guidance, so it's all on our external webpage, a ton of advice and guidance there. If something is not there that you need, reach out to us and we will look at putting together a formal advice and guidance on your particular topic. And then of course we have these cyber defense services. So this is more for your IT security teams to be working with us on actual services that we can assist and maybe deploy on the networks. So I guess the message here is if your IT security teams are not already working with the Cyber Center, please do pass along our information. They can get right directly to our health team by using that email address at the bottom. And with that, that brings me to the end of the presentation. And it was a real pleasure to speak with you today. And hopefully you have a few takeaways that you can discuss amongst your working group moving forward.
Great. Thank you very much, Lindsay. We certainly have time for discussion, and this is why the forum was for, in a way, to exchange, and people have concern. And so I'll hand it off to Rajesh, who's going to be handling the question period. So feel free to post in the chat or raise your hand, and we'll do our best to put your question forward. So.
Thank you, Lindsay, for an outstanding talk. That was very informative. Okay, I will start with a question. Please feel free to type in the chat box and we'll discuss them. I have a question on operational technology. With labs getting involved into things with more and more equipments coming into the CL3 facility. And most of these equipments also going online. That is like flow cytometers, microscopes going online, having internet access. I see that as something that is something which people can use for and manage it. If not managed carefully, that is a problem. What advice can you give there, actually, especially when it comes to operational technology?
Great question. So what I will do just before answering that question is we do have a publication, it's fairly recent, on it's a cyber threat bulletin related to the cyber threats of operational technology. So I will post that in the chat as we go forward. I think one of the biggest concerns, as I mentioned, is that we have now these connected devices that they don't necessarily have security by design built into the IT component of the OT device. And so working with your IT security teams and your IT teams, there's one best practice of segmentation. So that basically means that you're putting your connected devices on a different segment of the network than maybe all of your trusted, protected pathogen databases and whatnot. So that there is that natural segmentation that if there is a threat actor that comes in via the OT, they're not able to then propagate and move to your very sensitive assets. So that's one, I think, mitigation that really needs to be considered with your IT security teams, is where are you actually connecting those OT devices onto the network. And it no longer is like haphazard. It can't be haphazard. You can't just walk in anymore with a new microscope and, you know, connect it to the network.
Excellent, thank you.
Okay, I'll post this this publication right now.
So we have some questions in the chat box. There's one question from Hugo Sodin. Excellent presentation. Can I respectfully and out of curiosity ask what your credentials are?
Sure. I am a mechanical engineer by all my schooling background. And I seamlessly moved from working for a decade at the Canadian Space Agency to moving over to communications security establishment. And I started, as was alluded to earlier, I spent about 15 years building cybersecurity training for everybody at CSE and our international partners, so that there was some kind of standard for those that were doing cybersecurity for their federal governments across the Five Eyes. And having done that for about 10 years, I moved over to the Cyber Center, where it's a different lens, because before I was doing sort of the offensive cybersecurity, how to protect against the targets that were coming to us. Now I'm sort of promoting cybersecurity. So those are my credentials.
Thank you. There's a question from Marc-Andre. Thank you for your presentation. If we suspect being the target of a breach or cyber attack, how do we engage with you? That's a very practical question. What is the process and whom do we contact?
Very good. I'll put it right here. So on our website, there is a portal for reporting. And just put it right here before I continue my answer. So two parts to the answer. One is, please report any cyber incident. Whether you need our help or not, we really do encourage everyone, every critical infrastructure, every Canadian business to report any cyber incident they have. Why? The more we know, the more we can protect and support all the other organizations across the country. So first and foremost, please report regardless of whether you need mitigation support or containment support. Use the reporting portal that I've just put in there. It's on the CSC's main homepage. It's on the Cyber Center's main homepage. We will have an incident response team member get back to you after you have reported. The other one is that you can always contact us if you want to send us an email and you cannot find the portal. And that is the generic email address. It all comes into the front door. And depending on what your question is, it will go to the incident response team. It'll come to the engagements team if you want another presentation at some stage, and so on and so forth. So that's kind of like the front door. And as I mentioned, if you want specifically to work with our health team, you can send an email to one of my staff members. Will respond to that and get back to you and help support you with your specific question to support what's going on in your labs.
Wonderful. That will be very useful to our biosafety officers. All right. There's another question from Andre. Do you have examples of working with academic institutions to and freedom of researchers to discuss research, cooperate, peer-to-peer review of results, etc.?
So I'm just reading the question. Do you have examples of working with academic institutions to balance the security and freedom of researchers to discuss research, cooperate, peer-to-peer review? Yeah, this is a big one. Research security is something that the federal government has been working on very hard over the last 12 to 18 months. The programs that we've been involved with to date involve requesting federal funding for research programs. And we ran a pilot with a number of federal organizations and the Tri-Council, where for one particular program, I think it was the Alliance program out of NSERC, for those that were applying for funding, they had to do a risk assessment, a cybersecurity risk assessment. So if you go to, I believe it's NSERC's website, they have the details of that risk assessment that needs to be done. And essentially, the risk assessment comes out low, medium, high. If it's high, it gets sent to the Cyber Center for additional review to see what mitigations are being put in place for that type of research-related security with another partner. So there is, I think I can pull up one publication that we did specific to research security in the academic sector that I can post here. But other than that, I think that's most of my information that I have on research security.
Okay, we have two more questions. Any guidance on balancing automatic patching against supply chain hacks like SolarWinds, auto patching with compromised update sources effectively, and auto compromise on the infrastructure? That's a question or comment from Mark.
Any guidance on balancing automatic patching against supply chain hacks, SolarWinds, auto patching with compromised update sources? Yeah. Okay, so for those that don't know, the issue with SolarWinds a year and a half ago now, I think, was a number of organizations used the SolarWinds product. What the threat actors did is they managed to get onto the SolarWinds network. They added their malware to the SolarWinds update. So when SolarWinds pushed their update to hundreds of thousands of customers, they actually pushed their update with the malware so that the threat actors could then compromise all of the clients' systems. So this one here relates back to sort of one of the big cybersecurity threats right now, which is related to supply chain. And the idea is that you really, really need to know who your vendors are. I will post another advice and guidance here specific to the threats associated with supply chain and some of the mitigations that you can take. But the bottom line with supply chain is you need to know who they are and you need to ask the questions of your supply chain to make sure that they have proper cybersecurity controls in place. Hope that answers the question.
Thank you.
The one I'm posting right now, I did find it. It's security considerations for research and development. So that one will have some information there about open research. And then we'll do the one that I just talked about, which was, remind me.
And there's a very on the basic training available from Canadian Center for Cybersecurity for all of us. That'll be very useful.
Yeah, okay, so a couple things on training. One is we have what we call the Learning Hub. They are external facing. You can get to them from our external Cyber Center website. It's a big red-ish box that says Learning Hub, and they have a number of free e-learning courses related to the basics of cybersecurity. So that's one that I would highly recommend. Most of their other courses are cost recovery, so you do have to pay. So if you're looking for something quick and easy and free, I think that one of their basics of cybersecurity e-learning would be great. The other thing is we have a Get Cyber Safe program, and it is essentially, they produce products and tools and training nuggets and small videos and infographics specific for Canadians. So if you're finding that the cybersecurity training per se is too much for your lab officers, managers, biosafety officers, if it's too much, then I might suggest you go to our Get Cyber Safe program. And they have a ton of resources online, and they're just little nuggets on, like, you know, how to avoid phishing, or how to use better passwords, strong, unique passwords, stuff like that. So you might find that really useful. And the third piece that I will say is that the Learning Hub is happy to work with organizations to develop unique training that you need to support your particular focus. So if neither of those two options sort of meet what you think you're going to need for your labs, then by all means reach out to your health sector, which is the email I gave you there, health-par-santé, and start working with them, and they can sort of put you in contact with the Learning Hub if that makes sense to do so.
Okay, I will ask you one more final question from Larissa. That's on many student users of CL3 academic labs use cloud services such as Google Drive and Microsoft Office. That's what's your advice about the quality of security?
Sorry, what was that?
Okay, that's the second last question.
Okay. Oh yeah, okay. Do you more info about the quality of security cloud services, Google Drive, Microsoft Office? Yeah. Many student users of CLC. Okay. So the Cyber Center has done an assessment on many cloud services. As you can imagine, Google and Microsoft are like some of the most used cloud service providers. And we don't recommend one vendor over another, we can't, but based on the analysis that the Cyber Center has done on many cloud providers, those two are perfect. They're great. They have a lot of cybersecurity controls built in, as long as you're using them. Fantastic. So I have no issue with either one of those. And I can also, I mean, it goes into a little bit of technical detail, but I will post the guidance for cloud service providers as well in the chat. Might not be what you're looking for. It's a bit technical, but honestly, Google and Microsoft do good.
All right. Okay, I think we have addressed most of the questions. Thank you. It's almost 12:56. And thanks again, Lindsay, for this wonderful talk. It was very resourceful. We look forward to the resources and the training opportunities. Very quickly, the slides will be and or the recording will be available on the Cabal 3 website. Soon we'll post it. And I will also send out a survey. And we are a small community and we would like to keep connected, especially the biosafety officers connected. And that's one of the objectives of Cabal 3. I will send you a survey asking some few questions on what kind of workshops do you like to see in future and things alike. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Rajesh. Thank you, Lindsay. Thank you, everyone, for attending. Hopefully, you found this useful, and we'll try to do another interesting talk in the next few months, and hopefully get the community engaged in topics that are relevant to our research and with group risk 3 pathogens. So, thank you all.